love this time of year, spooky season. It gets darker earlier, people hunker down, we feel the crunch of leaves under our feet, but the sound of them might make you jump a bit when you're out for a walk by yourself. We lean into cozy drinks and blankets, but also close the curtains and maybe double check the locks on our doors. Some people love to be scared. Others avoid it like their lives depend on it, their hearts, their minds, they cannot take it. Today, we're talking about spooky storytelling in the lead up to Halloween. We'll be joined by a podcaster who talks about fear and fright daily. We'll be joined by a sociologist who has researched why we like to be scared and might be a bit of a horror movie aficionado herself. And we'll also hear from a horror and supernatural author about what appeals to her about the genre. Of course, we want to hear from you. Do you love to be scared? What's your favorite scary storytelling medium? Do you like to read it, watch it, listen to it? What's your favorite scary story? And how did you find out about it? Call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. So when I say that I love Halloween in this time of year, it was not always this way. Living alone, I could not do scary. But these days, I live with two horror movie nuts. We do haunted houses, we watch scary movies, we hear ghost stories. I still don't really like clowns, though. Today, I am joined by two other people who are fascinated by horror and scary stories. Cassie Ozog is a sociologist and a professor with a PhD at the University of Regina. She's done a lot of research around pop culture, fear, society, mass media, and mental health, and she is a horror fan herself. Brennan Storr is an author and podcaster who has built his career around telling scary stories. He is part of the podcast Ghost Story Guys, which is one of Canada's longest-running spooky storytelling shows. And he's a co-writer on Fear Daily, which is a horror fiction podcast that just celebrated hitting 1 million downloads. He's joining us from London, Ontario. Welcome to both of you to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I want to start with the same question to both of you. I want to know how you got into scary stories. What was your introduction? Cassie, I'll start with you.
Oh, man. Well, I'm definitely of an elder millennial, so I'm definitely of the generation of folks who ended up watching a lot of, teen shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark and like reading a lot of Christopher Pike and Goosebumps books. And then, of course, like graduating to watching Unsolved Mysteries and X-Files far too young, which actually kind of turned me off of scary stories for a little while. Like I was definitely kind of freaked out and I didn't really kind of circle back to watching horror movies regularly until I was in high school. Like definitely you'd always in, middle school and when you're young watching scary movies at people's houses when you shouldn't have been. But yeah, it was just kind of that, it started very young in a variety of ways. And so naturally I've now got like a pile of vintage Goosebumps books stockpiled in my attic for when my toddler is old enough to start being traumatized by scary stories.
You're not reading them to her now, are you?
Would I get in trouble if I said I was? No, I'm not. I'm certainly not. No, we got a ways to go before we read those. But she also loves all things kind of scary. She loves skeletons and pumpkins and Halloween decorations and Halloween. And she's not scared of spiders like I am. Like she's not a whole lot that scares her at the moment. So I'm sure we might be in the Goosebumps books sooner rather than later.
I love a brave toddler. I also worry for you with a brave toddler, but that's a whole other conversation. Brennan, what about you? What was your introduction to scary stories? How did you get into it?
My trajectory was very similar to Cassie's. I was born in '83, so as soon as I was old enough to watch Ghostbusters, I was all over that. I think I wore out the tape from the video store, watching it, a ridiculous number of times. And then, got a little older. I remember, I think it was 7 or 8 when my mother sat me down to watch The Shining with her because she didn't want to watch it alone.
Oh, God.
And,
oh, God. Can we get your mother? No, I'm not.
And then I sort of found it again in late high school with, slasher movies and sort of grew out from there. I've always been, ghost stories, I think ever since Ghostbusters had that interest, but that's something I kind of came to more in my 20s.
I really did find the second Ghostbusters movie really scary. Like, I saw it once and then did not want to watch it again until I was an adult. Something about the bad guy in that one really got me. I watched the TV series, in second grade. My mom said no, so I walked around the corner to my best friend's house at the time and watched it then. And that, until this day, is why I don't particularly have an affinity for clowns. But I'm wondering if the two of you believe in ghosts, supernatural. Do you have a belief in it? If you like scary stories this much, do you compartmentalize it or do you believe in it? Brennan, I'll start with you.
I have a really annoying answer to this question because obviously I've been telling ghost stories for 9 years now. And the answer is, I think, yes, asterisk, in that I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I don't think it's necessarily the spirits of the dead are returning. I mean, I'd like that. Death terrifies me. There's a lot of folks I've lost who I'd love to see again, but I think it's probably more complex than someone died in this house, so this house is haunted. But I think people are seeing and experiencing something that is very real, and I think it's something we don't yet have the capacity to understand. I don't know that we ever will.
Cassie, what about you?
Yeah, I actually feel similarly to Brennan, and I do think that, just not necessarily that ghosts and things like that have to be scary and attached to like horror and fear. I think Brennan is right. I think a lot of people cling to stories of ghosts and haunting as a way to process grief and sadness, right? Like, there's some people who would love to be haunted in a way by the spirit of a loved one who's passed on. So for me, I also agree. I have a belief. It's a little bit more complicated. I think it's a lot more complex. And I think there's a lot of things in this world and in the larger universe that we don't know and quite understand. So, but I don't necessarily think that has to be something that's inevitably scary and attached to, Halloween season.
Do you have no-goes, parts of horror that you absolutely can't watch? Mine is paranormal. I can't do it. My imagination's too vivid. I have not even watched the paranormal series because it will turn me into a paranoid human being. Do you guys have no-goes that you can't do it?
Yes, I do.
What are your no-goes?
Well, it'll be very specific scenarios, like things like, and I think I've talked to you about this before, Sam, but home invasion stuff really freaks me out. Like everyday scenarios that could happen. So when you get into slashers and monster movies and paranormal stuff, that doesn't freak me out as much. Like, it certainly can scare me in that moment, but those aren't no-goes for me. Things that certainly involve like harm to animals and children, things that might involve assault, sexual assault, those are tough things for me to take on in any movies, not just horror movies, right? So yeah, they're more kind of those really specific scenarios, more larger themes or subgenres of horror. I'm pretty open to most things. I'll try almost any movie once.
What about you, Brennan?
I can't do torture. I can't do anything that involves someone being confined to a space against their will. I really struggle with that. One of my listeners sent me a copy of the film Strangerland, which is this slasher film from '98 starring Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. And I wanted to sound tough, but I had to tell her, this is beyond me. Because it's essentially that just ad nauseum, and it's too much. That and cannibalism. I struggle with both those things.
Okay. We want to hear from you today. We're talking about scary storytelling, the mediums in which we engage with it, or if you avoid it entirely. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-716-2221 or email us bluesky@cbc.ca if any of this resonates with you. Maybe there's something you always watch or read this time of year. I have already watched Hocus Pocus. It'll probably happen again before Halloween. We got an email from Nick. It says, my neighbor really does not love horror, but her 13-year-old son loves watching scary TV shows and movies. She wanted to connect with her son, so this summer they would do 15 minutes of horror. Her son would pick a scary movie he wanted to watch, and together, in the middle of the day, they would watch scary movies together. It was manageable for her in those little bite-sized pieces, and it came to be a connection point during the day that they both really looked forward to. I think that's really sweet. If you have a story about scary storytelling, give us a call, 1-800-716-2221 or email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. Brennan, how did you get into horror and podcasting? We're in an age where everybody wants a podcast. Everybody in theory, could have a podcast, but horror podcasting is real specific. How did you get into that?
So I got into podcasting back in 2017, shortly after my first book came out. My book was a collection of ghost history from my hometown of Revelstoke in BC. And I started the podcast with another author, and we just were telling ghost stories and paranormal stories, kind of as a way to almost help promote both my book and his book, which was coming out that spring. And it just grew from there. And as I said, I've been doing that full time since the end of 2020. But the horror podcasting, Fear Daily, that came about when I was approached by another podcaster, Brandon Scheck-Snyder, who does Southern Gothic out of Nashville. And he asked if I had any interest in writing fiction. And it's something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but I just never made time for it. And so we sat down, we planned out this show, Fear Daily, which was retro 90s horror. And this idea that these stories are sitting on a bulletin board system that was long hidden from history and has now been uncovered. And I had to learn real fast how to, I wrote fiction, and then I've written about 1,600, 1,700 pages of original fiction for the show. And kind of trial by fire. And I just started incorporating all the stuff I've watched and seen and read, and using it as a way to kind of put some distance between myself and all the stuff that scares me.
What do you typically write about? What do you gravitate towards when you're creating horror stories?
For me, a lot of it ends up being body horror, because I find the human body terrifying. Just the many and varied ways it can fail you. And so I found myself writing really quite graphic stuff sometimes with elements of decay or things being put upon someone else by outside agencies. So maybe like supernatural curses and things like that. That tends to be one of the places I drift to. That and sort of urban horror. There's a film called Nomads with Pierce Brosnan from the late 80s that has always fascinated me, because it kind of deals with sort of this idea of like horror within cities on the streets, but supernatural. And I feel like it's something that's not normally done. Usually if it's haunted, it's in an apartment or it's in a house in somewhere in the country. So I like urban horror.
Okay, Cassie, you've done a lot of research on media and pop culture, and you're a horror aficionado. You have a whole other Instagram account dedicated to it. But why do we like to be scared? From a sociological point of view, what is going on in our brains that we seek out something that scares us?
Well, there's a variety of reasons I've always found in my work and, of course, my personal experience about why we do this. I think in some aspects, it's community. It's communal. I think some of the things that both you and Brendan have been talking about, or the email we just got in right from one of the listeners about finding that connection, that experience of going to the movie theater, to a packed house to watch a horror movie, or, if you're somebody who, say, dragged their friend to go see Hereditary in the theater with only 10 people in it. But those 10 people, we were family by the time we left the theater that day. It's something that kind of brings you together. There's something really exciting about being scared, whether you watched it as a group of friends where you all would scream and then giggle afterwards, or you're able to kind of connect with people over the shared love of it. There's a communal thing happening. And the other piece of it is that it really is a space for us to explore the things that scare us. So you'll also see certain types of horror, and not just horror, but movies in general, certain themes kind of ebb and flow depending on what's happening socially and historically. So when we start to have fears of the end of the world, of apocalypse looming, we'll start to see thematic movies come up that kind of relate to that. This is a big part of why we saw the zombie craze happen around the turn of, the 2000s, the turn of the millennium. Right, is that people could go, okay, a zombie apocalypse is not actually going to happen. This is not real, right? As far as we know. So people could explore what would the end of the world look like? What would it be like to see society collapse in a way that was safe to do so? So even if you're actually harboring that real life fear of like, oh God, what happens if the world collapses? That can be almost too scary to take on in daily life, to think about it in real terms. So to kind of sit back and watch a movie, put on The Walking Dead or whatever in that scenario, it's a little bit easier, because then you can turn it off when the movie's done, right? You leave the theater, the lights turn on, you get back to your quote unquote normal life. And so there's something about that that lets us have these like little pockets of time where we can really let go, really see the things that terrify us the most in a somewhat safe environment, or at least a controlled environment. And maybe we have nightmares later, maybe we're still scared about it, but then we can kind of step away from that and go back. So there's something about horror, I think, that really lets us explore the deepest, darkest fears that we have in a way that's just somewhat controlled.
I just had this whole aha moment as you're talking about that, thinking back to early university when The Ring came out. And I remember going to the movie theater to see The Ring, and the heating was broken in the movie theater, but it was opening weekend or around opening weekend, and it was packed. And so they said, you can go in or you can come back another time. And it was like, you could see your breath in the theater, but we went. And I remember distinctly in the movie when she crawls out of the movie, out of the television in that movie. This is not a spoiler. If you haven't seen The Ring, you're not going to see it. She crawls out of the TV, and I let out a swear out loud in the theater, and everyone started laughing. And because everyone's having this fear together. And then I think back to The Ring and how I sprinted past televisions for a good week after that movie. Like, I was really not. And now I think about it, and it's almost like an allegory for what we watch on television and how it affects us mentally. And I had never thought about it like that until you started talking about the community experience and what these films can mean for us, and how they how watching some things maybe you shouldn't be watching can affect your mental health.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, even this is not a horror to most people, but I can remember getting dragged by some friends to go see Twilight when it first came out in theaters. And that's just no shade. Everybody has their thing. It's not my thing. But so I kind of sat back and just watched audience reactions throughout that movie. And it's just, I love doing that. I love going to horror movies and watching people scream and throw popcorn. Like, my dad had got dragged to go see Jaws in the theater by my mom, right around opening. And my dad was super bored by it, just super bored. How you can be bored by Jaws. Whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But certainly when Jaws pops it, right? Like when the shark pops out of the water, my dad was that like stereotypical guy who was leaning forward with his popcorn and threw his popcorn everywhere, and the whole theater laughed at him. And I think it humbled him. But I think about that. I think, like, if I was in a movie theater and saw somebody throw popcorn, that would be the great, because it's like you were in it. You were so committed to the story and to the experience that you were just so pulled in. I think that's a compliment to the filmmakers. I think that speaks a lot about what it's like to really be in a moment with the movies. And I love that. Even seeing A Quiet Place in the theater, people around me were too scared to eat popcorn because they didn't want to create noise. It was incredible, right? So I think it's so powerful. I think movies are stories that just speak so deeply to our own personal experiences. It's the same with really powerful books. It's the same with really powerful podcasts. Like, stories are just, right? They're the essence of who we are as humans. And so, yeah, I think you hit one that really strikes a nerve, it's going to stay with you.
When we're talking about the mediums of being scared, I think everyone has their own preference. Movies may be the most popular just because of that community experience. If you're reading a scary book by yourself, you don't really have anyone to talk about it with. I have a book club called the Novel Ideas Society. And years ago in October, we always pick a scary book. And we did The Long Walk, which is in theaters right now. And one of the ladies in my book club told me she put the book on her front porch at the end of every night because she just couldn't even deal with it being in the house because it bothered her that much. Because when you're in a book, you're in your head. And I think podcasting in a fictional way like you do, Brennan, can be kind of the same way because you're in someone's ears, in their head. Do you consider that when you're writing? Because it's so different than a visual medium.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. I grew up, one of my influences was the golden age of radio theater. It used to play in Revelstoke at night between 8 and 9. So I would hear shows like Halls of Fantasy or Dimension X, which were terrifying to me, because it's so much more vivid when you're listening to it. And so I try to channel that a little bit in writing those stories. we've talked about publishing them in companion volumes at some point. And of course, I've realized that there are some things you can actually get away with when someone is telling the story as opposed to just reading it. Because every now and again, I'll read a story and go, oh man, this is lazy. This is entirely depending on my narrator, his smooth Southern voice, and glazing over some of the cracks in the storytelling, shall we say.
Thanks, David. Before I let you go,
Yep.
The news can sometimes feel like a horror movie, depending on the day. I say that tongue in cheek, but it can be really awful. Do you like being scared outside of work in the news?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just went to Weapons with my 14-year-old at
What
the
did you think of
theater.
it?
Oh, it was really good. Although at one point there was like this 16-year-old girl who burped during a really tense scene, and everybody started laughing. And we actually talked to her later, and apparently she was dared to do it by her dad. So that all squares as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, it was great. Good movie.
Yeah, it was. That was also an intense one as well.
Unexpected. It's good to not know anything about that movie before you go into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not see the end on that one coming. David, thanks so much for this.
You're welcome.
That is the CBC's David Shield. I'm Sam McKegg. Today we are talking about spooky storytelling, scary storytelling here on Blue Sky. If you love scary stories, or maybe you don't, maybe this is not your jam, and there's a reason for that. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-716-2221 or email us bluesky@cbc.ca. How do you like to consume your scary stories? Do you like to go into a haunted house and hear about how it's haunted, or do you prefer that from a distance? That's my preference. I toured Fort San in the middle of the night once on a ghost tour. Those of you who like to be scared would give it 5 stars. Those of you who don't like to experience that in person might give it none. So it really depends on the kind of person you are and if you like being scared. I want to share something with the two of you before we continue. I mentioned I host a book club here at CBC Saskatchewan. It's in partnership with the Regina Public Library. And in September, our book club selection was The Bewitching by Canadian-Mexican author Silvia Moreno Garcia. You might know her as the author of the mega popular book Mexican Gothic. I picked The Bewitching because I love a good witchy story this time of the year, and the book delivers. And as part of our meetings, we always chat with the author. And in conversation, she told me she doesn't believe in ghosts or witches and that she's loved horror stories since she was a kid. She actually started reading Stephen King with her mom when she was young because she grew up in Mexico, and there weren't a lot of other books that were really popular that were translated to Spanish language at the time. So that's how she got into Stephen King. So I asked her, what appeals to her about writing horror?
I think genres are just simply different ways of painting pictures. So sometimes you can take a realist picture of your environment with a camera, with your iPhone or with some other kind of camera, and you get an exact shot of a person at that time and place. But you can also paint a portrait, and depending on the style that you're painting, you can end up with an impressionistic painting or a surrealist painting, or you can end up with all kinds of different stuff. And yet that painting is not less real or accurate to life just because it's not the same as a snapshot. When Van Gogh paints lights over a city, and they're swirling lights which cannot exist in real life. No sky looks like that. Yet that Starry Night is an iconic painting, and it represents something special about that landscape. So it's the same with horror and with fantasy and science fiction and other categories. They just allow you to paint pictures in different ways. And horror gives you certain tools that you don't necessarily find in romance, or you don't necessarily find when you are reading noir. So it just provides you with a way to looking at different experiences. I find horror sometimes very useful as a category for certain things.
What are some of those tools that you can use in horror that you wouldn't, I mean, aside from maybe some, murder, that you wouldn't use in like romance, but what tools are you using differently in that kind of story versus like a contemporary romance?
Well, for example, if you're talking about pregnancy, you can write a novel where a woman is pregnant and she is ambivalent about the child and about her marriage, or you can write Rosemary's Baby. And not saying that serious kind of, very lifelike drama is bad at all, but I think Rosemary's Baby, if you've ever watched the movie or read the book, it captures some of the anxieties of a first-time mother very well. It's an old book. It has aged in some ways. I read it recently. I was a bit like, oh, that doesn't really, But in other ways, it still rings somewhat true to life too. How you feel when you're having a child for the first time, all those fears becoming physical. My friend who is pregnant right now, she said that she thought she had a parasite inside, and she loves her parasite. Still, it's a weird experience when you feel for the very first time, if you ever had a child kick in your womb. It is a little bit uncanny. And I think Rosemary's Baby, for example, captures that experience very well. I went to see, there's been several body horror movies recently, but it was the one with Demi Moore, The Substance.
The Substance, yeah.
Yeah, it was a riot. The whole movie theater was just having a lot of fun. I mean, The Substance is about aging in parts and women, and perhaps waking up one day. And I am 44, and I have this year seen my body change in ways that I didn't kind of expect. They say now that you age in faster bursts rather than over a period of time. And I think I am in my fast burst, where I'm waking up some mornings and finding hairs where I didn't think they were before. I'm like, I swear to God, that hair was not in that place last night. I think it grew overnight. And I do think that The Substance, in that sense, it captures some of that horrific sense of aging and the pressures of being a woman, having to present yourself into the world, which again, we could do a documentary about that, about what it's like
I see what you're
to
saying.
be menopausal. But The Substance, if you go watch it, I think you get something out of it that maybe a documentary kind of format doesn't give you.
That was my book club conversation with Canadian-Mexican author Silvia Moreno-Garcia, talking about writing horror stories. Her book, The Bewitching, was our Novel Idea Society book club pick in September. You can find that whole conversation in our Facebook group. Just look for the Novel Idea Society. My guests today are also Cassie Ozog, who's a sociology professor at the University of Regina, and Brennan Storr, who's an author and podcaster. Cassie, what she said there, I'm wondering what stood out to you as someone who consumes horror.
I mean, so much of what she said I thought was just bang on. Her talking about horror providing certain tools or just a different way to look at the world or look at a particular topic. I'm often reminded too, and I have this conversation a lot with folks who follow my movie account. And there'll be a lot of movies that aren't specifically labeled as horror films that have horrified people. And it's kind of this reminder that a movie doesn't have to just be within the horror genre to be horrific. Sometimes I think it's definitely what she said. There's certain tools that can be applied to really make a part of a story or a narrative hit home a little harder than you would expect. And of course, her conversations around Rosemary's Baby and The Substance, I think she nailed it. The Rosemary's Baby, I think both the story and the movie both really highlight, those fears of a first-time mom, but also I think as somebody, when you're a pregnant person, the gaslighting that comes towards you, that people talking down to you and condescending to you, anybody who's been pregnant can definitely relate to that. And I also, I like that she brought up The Substance, because I do think that The Substance, of course, Coralie Farge's second feature film, that really, I think it opened a door a little bit. I think you're going to see more filmmakers. You're going to see a lot of women. I think you'll see some queer, non-binary, trans folks start to get a little bit more, I hope, fingers crossed, but I think you'll start to see a little bit more mainstream time in horror films. We've been seeing that a little bit here and there, but I think even more because they're starting to hit on these things that previously we haven't spoken a lot about, right? Like conversations around menopause and women aging, right? Women turn 40 and society just pretends they don't exist anymore, right? Until they're like a Meryl Streep at 80 and could come back and star in a movie as like the old grandmother. So to actually have those frank conversations, we're not having them in mainstream media, but horror is a perfect place to kind of explore those things. And kind of what Brendan was saying earlier about body horror, right? Like it is kind of horrific to feel your body fail on you or have all these changes. So yeah, what a fascinating conversation. That must have been a really great full conversation with her.
There is a YouTube link if you would like to watch it down down the road. She's great. It was really interesting conversation just about horror and Mexican tradition as well, and where a lot of cultural and folklore falls into horror as well, and how it can be similar across cultures. It just looks a little different. I think we see that particularly in Indigenous traditions, where you have the Wendigo and the Weedigo and all of those different trickster characters and stuff that can very much turn into a horror story. If you haven't read Bad Cree by Jessica Johns, it'll get you in the creepies. It's really good, but it's also very creepy. I want to go to the phones because we do want to hear from you today if you're listening. 1-800-716-2221 or send us an email at bluesky.ca. We're talking about scary storytelling today. Robert is on the line in Saskatoon. Hi, Robert. Go ahead.
Hi there. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for asking.
Okay. When you talk horror, Rosemary's Baby, that's a trigger. I saw that when I was too young. But CBC for many years did drama on once a week. I can't remember, but one year I heard the whole Frankenstein on the radio, done by the University of New Brunswick. So I'm going to say in the late 70s I heard that. And they pre-opted all the other programming just to air it on a Halloween night. It was just bizarre. It was amazing. In the 80s, I was living in Toronto, and CBC FM aired what was called The Black Persian. And it was 26 weeks, like half a year. And they aired these once a week, and they were like a half hour. Or, yeah, I think they were half hours. And every one of those episodes, there was something very creepy about them. I tell you, they were odd. Where the goddess Kali comes from, and that history of Africa, and all of it. And it was based on a Canadian ending up in Africa. I don't know. It might be hard to see in your archives or whatever. I'd like to hear more Stuart McLean. Some of that's creepy. And then I'd like to mention Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
And anything that he wrote, and that twisted attitude. And that goes for Alfred Hitchcock, too. And all of his movies, early movies. And anyways, that's horror to me. Omen,
I love it.
Damien, etc.
So you prefer to read and listen.
Day.
You like to read and listen to your horror then. You're not a watcher.
Oh, I don't go to movies. Rosemary's, Omen. The Omen solved that for me. I'll never go to a movie that's advertised as creepy, horrifying, or any of that. And Jaws was, well done. They had you thinking, if you go swimming in the ocean, I mean, really, there's, 20, 30 people a year that are shark attacked out of millions of people being in their waters. It's their fault, right?
But it's the unknown, right?
It's me in there.
Yeah, it's the unknown of what's under your feet when you're in the ocean. You don't know. Robert, thanks so much for the call. I want to go to an email we got as well from Linda. She said, my imagination is way too active, and hence the reason I don't read scary books or watch scary movies. When my grandchildren were growing up, we became ever so aware of what was seen and heard before bedtime. Many horrific things were carried over into sleep. I grew up with CBC News at 8 p.m., relaying war events from the Korean War. I did not like that announcer. As I grew in years, I could understand how that 8 o'clock news affected me and why I disliked him. I can't remember his name, but I certainly can see him. That's from Linda. Cassie, I think that I want to talk to you about current main events. Did I watch wrestling last night? Current events, and movies and pop culture. And if that can cross over. I know you and I have over the years had many conversations about the media, what's shown in the news, what people are watching, and how it's also changed from things that you would see over time because the world is smaller. Everyone has a camera in their pocket. We have much more access to things that maybe we wouldn't have before. Things we should see, things we shouldn't see. Is there harm to our mental health if we watch too many scary movies, if we take in too many awful news programs? Like, what's the line there between watching too much awful news or watching a horror movie every night before we go to bed?
Well, we're tiptoeing into psychology here, which obviously isn't my area of
Yes.
expertise. And there's a lot of research that suggests like that's quote unquote abnormal. For me personally, I feel my mental health is in a far worse place when I am stayed up to date on current events. That's not to say that I don't stay up to date. I think it's really important as a citizen of this world to be informed of what's going on. I think it's a problem when people turn a blind eye to things that are happening in the world. But I mean, constantly following updates of, say, the horrific genocide in Palestine that's happening right now, that's going to do a number on your mental health. And it perhaps sounds a bit bizarre, but, if I spend my days reading and working in that area, paying attention to the current events in the news, because that's also a big part of my job. But as I said, also, I think an important responsibility of being an empathetic citizen of the world, which is to know and understand and to advocate for things to be better. I actually do like to relax in the evening with a horror movie. And I honestly think it's because, especially if it's like one of my quote unquote comfort horror movies, I know what's going to happen. I know what the scares are.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's comforting in a way. You just said this earlier with our last caller there, Robert. It is the fear of the unknown, and watching increasing terrifying headlines coming through, both happening here and abroad, watching and listening to, I mean, I'm sure you feel this probably the same way a lot in your own job, hearing like the constant news stories and the things that you have to report on too and constantly talk about every day. It's terrifying because we don't know which way it's going to go. We see increasing tensions happening in the United States right now. As I said, we see there are multiple genocides happening across the globe. Like, we are seeing all of these things and this growing pressure cooker of a world that we live in. And there's an unknown. We don't know which way it's going to go. We don't truly know what's going to happen next. We can make assumptions, but we don't. So if anything, and not everybody will agree with me, but for me, watching horror movies that I have some control over, that I have a sense of what's going to happen if I haven't seen it, or if I generally, I know the beats in a horror movie, generally speaking, or if it's, as I said, a movie I've seen before, there's some comfort there for me because I can be scared. I can have that emotional release of fear, of the adrenaline rush, but then I can turn the movie off afterwards. And that does give me a little break from being in the news for a couple hours.
Okay. I want to go back to the phones. Chris is on the line in Regina. Chris, go ahead.
Good afternoon. So when I was young, I was a almost compulsive reader of ghost stories, and they were usually, and it was sort of like compendiums of ghost stories from different parts of the world. So I remember reading about ghost stories from the United Kingdom, and another collection from Scandinavia, and then some Canadian ones. And as kids, we used to gather at the front steps of the house of a friend and tell ghost stories in the evenings in the summer. And that was one of our favorite activities. For scary fiction, I would recommend to anybody who hasn't read it. I still think Bram Stoker's Dracula is a classic. I didn't read that till I was an adult, but it kept me up late into the night, basically because I was afraid to go to bed.
Oh, wow.
In the midst of reading that. So it's one I would recommend. And I'll just quickly share. So given that we're coming up to Halloween, this is a personal story. So a number of years ago, I've been out of the country traveling for a prolonged period, came back to Canada, got an apartment and in downtown Regina, and shortly after moving in, very strange things started happening. Like, things would be moved, I would come home, lights were on, and I started thinking I was losing my mind because of all these odd things that were going on. Well, it kind of was progressing throughout the fall of that year, and on Halloween I got invited to go out for drinks with some friends. And in the course of the gathering, I met a young woman who had actually lived not only in the same building that I was living in, but the very same suite. And as soon as I told her what apartment I was living in, her first words, she turned pale, her eyes got wide, and she said, "What's been going on?" And then she proceeded to share everything that had happened to her while she was living in that apartment. So here it is. It's Halloween, and I basically now have confirmation that indeed my apartment is haunted. And then I get to go home that night back to this apartment, which is definitely haunted. The feeling of dread I had as I walked down the hall to go back into my suite was like nothing I'd ever experienced.
Which building was it? You don't have to tell us which suite, but I'm curious which building you were in.
It was a building on Cornwall Street, just a couple blocks south of downtown. Not an extremely old building. This building was probably constructed in the late 50s or early 60s.
Okay.
But interesting sort of footnote, I asked a few people who knew various people, and eventually I was told that an older woman had died in that suite, and because she had no relatives, it was quite some time before they actually discovered her dead in the suite. And I had always had the sense somehow that this presence was female. I just had that sense. So anyway, people can take that for what it is, but it definitely made me a believer in the existence of ghosts.
Thanks so much for that, Chris.
I think he should
welcome.
tell us what suite it is, so whoever's listening knows.
We're going to do actually a show in 2 weeks specifically on Saskatchewan ghost stories, where people will have their opportunity to share things that have happened to them and popular ghost stories that exist in this province. Lucille sent us an email. She said, I do not like horror/scary/psychological thriller movies, but in the 90s, my sister-in-law and I went to the video store, picked out a movie. She picked out Silence of the Lambs, and I thought, that's a sweet name for a movie, not having heard of the actual plot. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. I want to talk to you guys. We're coming up on the end of the show. We've got 7 minutes or so or less left. But I want to talk to you guys about pop culture and the creation of horror shows, because in talking to both of you before the show, I discovered you both don't like Ryan Murphy. And the reason that I find that interesting is because he is creating the most accessible horror because of his deal with Netflix. And so it's things that just pop up on your screen. He's the guy who is behind American Horror Story. He's behind the Monster series, the one with Jeffrey Dahmer, the Menendez brothers, and now Ed Gein. He's also the guy who made Glee, which is completely unrelated. But I'm wondering, Brennan, I wanted to start with you. What is it about Ryan Murphy's storytelling that turns you off now? Because people were really into Ryan Murphy for quite some time.
For me, I mean, I started to drift during Coven, the third season of American Horror Story, because I thought he had a problem with his endings. I thought the first half of the season was stellar, and I thought the second half was terrible. And then the fourth one was The Carnival, which had a lot of really great imagery, but no follow through whatsoever. And it was at that point I started realizing, okay, this is very much this is the vibes coding version of making horror projects. There's a lot of like strong visuals, but no humanity, because you need humanity for horror. That's a big part of it, right? You have to care. And I think horror falls down when it doesn't make that human connection. And then I to be honest, I don't really like true crime stuff very much, so I haven't even watched the one that everyone liked, the Dahmer one that he did. But
you're good.
Even American Crime Story. Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, you're fine. You're good.
Even American Crime Story, I thought was not very human, and not like I'm no friend of O.J. Simpson, but I just thought this is lacking in empathy. And so when the Versace one came out, by that point I was done.
Cassie, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to rant because we don't have time for what you probably want to say. But I'm just curious for your take on it, because I don't think people think about the people that are creating these things all the time and what their motives are. So what's your issue with this accessible horror?
In 2 minutes or less. I will say I did devour American Horror Story. I've seen almost every season except for some of the newer ones. Coven is actually my favorite, but I agree with your I agree, but it's the vibes and Jessica Lange. But I agree with your assessment, Brendan. He has trouble sticking the ending on his stories. My issues, especially with like the Jeffrey Dahmer, and I agree with you, the American crime stories, and with Ed Gein, the newest one that's come out. It's exploitative. Like it exploits the story. It exploits the victims and the memories of the victims. I've yet to see something that's made the mainstream that's done justice to Nicole Brown's story versus just people talking about O.J. Simpson. And that's the problem. I mean, we could get into a whole other show just about true crime. I think you have like the current true crime is not this new thing that's just come up in the last years. True crime has always been popular. You could go back to Victorian penny pages where true crime stories were the main seller, right? But the most recent, round of true crime has definitely been connected to a lot of true crime podcasts, which I'm sure, Brennan, in your whole world around podcasting, you know how popular they are, and compete against those kinds of narratives. And so much of them are they exploit the story, they exploit the grotesqueness of it, and overall, I think pretty consistently, not all, I don't want to classify all, but certainly a lot, and definitely Ryan Murphy's stories really do not honor the victims' voices, the victims' experiences, and especially with something like Jeffrey Dahmer, where the victims were primarily young queer men of color. That's disregarded. And so I'm not even touching the Ed Gein one. I didn't watch the Jeffrey Dahmer one. I watched clips of it. The Ed Gein, I'm not even touching. You're trying to make Ed Gein sexy. You're trying to make the guy who inspired Texas Chainsaw sexy. I can't imagine. Yeah, well, I can't. But you have Charlie Hunnam as Ed Gein. Like, what casting was that? And so I can't imagine that the victims and their stories are treated very well either. And I think that's Ryan Murphy's deal. And I think he needs to just move on out now. He's had his time. He's made his money. Let's have some different voices and some different people come in and tell us better stories.
I will say, I watched, we're about halfway through the Ed Gein series. It's not sexy, and Charlie Hunnam does not look like Charlie Hunnam, just to be clear. It is not, he is, if that's why you're watching, you're not going to feel fulfilled in that way. But it is the exploitive and the shock value is there. And that's why I don't know if we're going to keep watching, because it's pretty dark. Like it's pretty dark. Anyways, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Cassie, Brennan, thank you so much for your expertise, for sharing your scary parts of the world with us. I appreciate it so much. If you want to follow Cassie's Instagram page, reach out, and she has an event coming up for a movie. I will share that information with you as well, because we are coming up on the end. But what's the date, Cassie?
It's October 20th at the Regina Public Library Film Theater downtown for a screening of The Babadook with a really fun panel discussion afterwards. And there's going to be custom Babadook cookies and a costume contest and prizes and great discussion. So folks need to come out October 20th at the RPL.
All right, Cassie, thanks so much for that to both of you. I'm Sam McKeag. This has been so good. Thanks for listening.